Hi, everybody. This is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, interviews with the living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this is the last audio-only episode of Coffin Talk. We've talked about this a bit in the past, but we are moving on to a video format. I'm a little sad and I'm a little nostalgic because I love audio and I grew up listening to radio and not watching podcasts, but I do understand. So if you're one of those people who doesn't like watching, the good news is you can still just listen and download it like any other podcast. And the bad news is if you love video is that our guest today, Peter Teuscher, will not be available on video, unfortunately, but he's still an amazing, great human being, and I cannot wait to interview him. So with no further delays, Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Mike. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and we just get a short bio from our guest, so I know that you're a seasoned business and life coach, and I know that you also coach and write, and we're going to ask you a lot of questions about that. But before we get into that, I would like to know, how old are you, where did you grow up, and what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
I'm pretty sure I'm Generation X. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm 57 years old. Shocking to hear myself say that. And I grew up in Vancouver, Canada. So, but I am currently living in Hamburg, Germany. So I've got half of my family comes from Europe. So as in the new world, everybody's got kind of ancestors from around the world. But I grew up in Canada and living in Germany for the past 20 years.
Awesome. And I do not work for any of the naturalization services in any of the countries you mentioned, but I am curious, are you a dual citizen of Canada and Germany?
I'm now just a German citizen, sadly, because I had to at some point make the choice. Germany doesn't allow dual citizenship. And so, yeah, it's really odd for me as well, because people say, well, technically you're German, but I feel very Canadian. I grew up in Canada. I appreciate both cultures, but I really value sort of the upbringing that I had in Canada. So it's sad not to be able to have both, but yeah, currently only one passport.
Yeah, I taught ESL for 10 years, and one of the weirdest things that I just took for granted as an American is we are totally cool with dual citizenship in this country. So it never even occurred to me that, Canada or Germany would have a policy or a rule or that they would care. I know Canada allows it, but it's so interesting. And it's also interesting because identity is such a hot topic, for the last 20, 30 years, but also it really is like an important part of all of us, our identity, how we classify ourselves. So to have to formally say I'm no longer a part of a group that you still are obviously a part of must be kind of a big step. So can we break that down in that moment, where you had to give it up? Was there any part of you that was reticent? Was there any part of you that was like, this is a mistake, or was it just kind of easy sailing?
Well, no, it was before I was leaving Canada, I had to kind of, so my wife at the time, we were both, we couldn't we couldn't move to Europe without one of us having a European passport. So It was a very pragmatic choice that I had to, because I had a German mom, and actually Germany allows it after a certain age, but I'm too old to fall into that group that allows dual citizenship. Thankfully, my brother's kids are going to have dual citizenship. They've just applied. So, but when somebody asks me, I tell them I'm Canadian. It's just a reflex because the one thing I realized moving over here, I thought, I grew up with some German culture, at holidays and stuff. But when I got here, I realized, no, I'm very Canadian, and that's not a good or a bad thing. It's just it's just different. And so, like you say, identity, that's definitely, And then I think in the the pragmatic approach to, having the ability to come and live over in Europe was really a great thing. But it was in hindsight that I realized, wow, how big a decision that was. I think I took it a little too lightly. So yeah, but look, it is what it is, and I'm super happy to be here. And living in Hamburg's a great city, really good quality of life. So I have no qualms about being over here or being associated with the country. So
that's very cool. And sorry if these questions are pesky, but this is like my favorite topic is talking about cross cultures and communication. So you have no discernible accent from what I can tell. Are you fluent in German? Did your mother teach you German when you were growing up? How is that the language side work for you?
Yeah. So when I growing up in Canada, I was forced to go to German school every Saturday. We we didn't speak German at home, but I got the foundation through sort of 7 years of learning the language, and then when I that was a long time between when I stopped learning German and when I actually moved here. So I had to do a refresher when I got here. But I'm definitely fluent, and I I was really fortunate that I learned the basics when I was a kid because it made it a lot easier coming over here. Because now people go, "Oh, I only hear a slight accent when I speak German." So I'm very bilingual now, thankfully.
That's so cool. And what is the culture? I've only been to Germany once. I was in two cities, Berlin and Munich, and it was just really brief. And I was in my 20s, so I wasn't paying attention to the things I would care about now. But um, is the German community like receptive to you having an accent and stuff, or is it something where people bring it up and go like, "Oh, like is there that standoffishness, or is it really like they don't care, they just notice it?"
I don't get asked much. Like I think over the years, I've been very fortunate that I've fine tuned the language enough so that people don't really hear it. I find more because I lived for a while in Munich and nobody noticed because in Munich they have such a strong regional accent.
Mm.
So I think they maybe just assumed I was from another part of Germany. Um, I have when we get in, when it comes up in conversation, people will say, "Oh, really? You're from Canada? I would have thought you were from Sweden or something." So they would have pegged me as, when they heard little, it's grammatical errors that I make, right? So
Yeah.
my pronunciation will be good. It's when I make mistakes. So I guess some people might even think I'm just some uneducated, redneck German or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's really funny. That's so interesting. I'm so glad I'm asking these questions because it really does fill me with delight to just hear about everyone's unique experience on trying to fit in or not fit in and just how each culture works. I think my last question is coming from an American perspective, but since you're Canadian, it's pretty similar. Teaching SL, I met many, many, many Germans, and the first few times I had German students, they were all adults, by the way. I wasn't teaching children. They I was just blown away by the directness. It was so off-putting for me as a teacher because like it was
Yeah.
just the total opposite of what I'm used to as an American. Now, flash forward to a few months later, they became my favorite students because I love directness. It's so nice. It's so relieving. America's so indirect. We use like the conditional tense to ask you to open a window. It's crazy. So I'm curious, how is it? Because Canada is considered a very polite society, and Germany's not
Yes.
considered impolite, but that directness is considered rude in my culture. So can you answer all those weird questions I just asked?
Well, that's an experience I had in the very beginning when I moved here, and people would say things to me, and I would think, "Wow, that's kind of rude." And now I've gotten used to it, but they don't mean it in a rude or impolite way. But now I kind of find when I get visitors from Canada where you know people won't tell you what they want or they won't tell you what they really think, it becomes a bit annoying. So I actually did for a while. I did some for a company down in Munich. I did some intercultural training because they had a lot of people that went to Canada, and so one of the big things we talked about was the directness of the communication, because on a scale, if you have sort of indirect on your left and direct on your right, the Canada would be, you'd have like the Japanese, Korean, a lot of Asian cultures would be on the far left, indirect, and on the right you'd have like the Swiss, the Dutch, the Germans. They're very direct in their communication, but Canadians are kind of almost three-quarters of the way over towards the Asian culture. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so you can imagine the sort of culture. Well, I had a bit of culture shock when I came over here. Surprisingly, considering I grew up, with some contact with the German culture, but that real directness at first was a shock, and it really I got a little offended at times, but now I appreciate it so much. Because you don't question, well, did they really mean that?
Yeah.
Or you don't, there's you ask somebody their opinion, they'll give it to you. You ask them what do they prefer, and they'll tell you their real preference. They're not trying to be polite, and so I really appreciate that a lot now. And it annoys me now sometimes when I go back to Canada, and it's so indirect.
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy because that was my life. I was living in America, and from 5 p.m. to the next morning, I was immersed with Americans, and then I would go to this school for adults where every person in there except a few teachers were foreigners. And so it was like weird because I would I was the weirdo and so I would deal with all of this. And, imagine having a room. I'm sure you've done this because you're a business and life coach. I would have like a Japanese student sitting next to a German, and you can imagine the chaos that is one culture, which is the most like straight face, don't smile, don't show your emotions, be polite, think of others. And then the Germans, which isn't don't think of others, but it's say exactly what you're thinking and say it now. So yeah, it was so surreal, and I loved your responses. This is a bit of a weird segue, but it makes sense to me. You have a wonderful, happy, joyous energy. You're like full of life, and even when you said like, "Oh my gosh, I'm 57," like you sound like me at 43 saying the same thing. I'm sure I'll sound like you at 57. It's just you sound young and you have an enthusiasm, but based on your bio, life wasn't always that way. You said yourself that you faced serious mental issues in your early 30s. So I would love for you to briefly explain that experience, but then, let us know, how did you become this incredibly energetic and helpful person who wants to help other people?
Well, it was, I guess the struggles that I faced, mental health issues that I had kind of climaxed sort of as I hit my 30s. But, you know, basically I was, in a situation where my brother and I, we had our own business in Canada. Things were going great. From outwardly, people, it looked like we had a pretty great life, but I would go home to my apartment by myself and be quite miserable. And it was funny. I heard I was listening to an American radio station, and there was a public service announcement that said, if you're experiencing some or all of these conditions, you may be suffering from depression. And I was, wow, there's a name for this. I had no idea what it was. I was so misinformed about mental health, and I thought, does some kind of mental health issue mean I'm insane? But basically recognizing that sort of helped me go to, well, first I went to hypnotherapy because I thought that could fix my brain by getting myself hypnotized. But the more I learned, the more I realized actually there's a lot of stuff that I needed to deal with from my past. And so when I got into therapy, through therapy, we kind of recognized that my first depressive episodes were when I was, 7 years old in grade 2. And so it was this pattern throughout my childhood, my teenage years, and my young adult life. And I was, as a kid, I was often told I was lazy, and I thought it was this chronic laziness that kept me, on when it was really severe, on days where I didn't feel like I could get out of bed or even leave the apartment. And I just thought this was chronic laziness, and I thought it was a defect that I had. So I was at this place where I wasn't sure I really wanted to continue with my life, certainly not in the way I was feeling and the way I was perceiving life. And I think, when I got some help for myself, and look, it wasn't like then it was this straight uphill, this progression and constant improvement. It was a roller coaster. But on the days I was feeling good, I would work on myself and I would get help. And I started reading a lot of self-help books. And the great thing was I also started coaching basketball. With these young people that were also struggling at times, or at least some of them would come to me and we'd have these conversations, and I would teach them the stuff I was just learning, and it helped anchor that in me as well. So, and I think what I realized through that whole process was the thing that changed my life the most was changing my fundamental beliefs about myself, about life, all these kind of negative beliefs I'd accumulated, but also the way I chronically would think about things. So this habitual way of thinking. And when I changed those two things, life started to change. And the more I worked on myself, the better it got. So it was a long process. This was, more than 25 years ago. So clearly, it didn't happen overnight. But man, like what a difference. I can't even relate to, or even when I think about the person I used to be, it seems like a whole different person now. And so it was such a liberating experience to go through that. And I think having the experience is what helps me now help others.
That's so incredible. And I really gel with that story, and I understand it pretty deeply. The more I talk to successful people, and what I mean by that term is exactly this, people who had a problem and didn't ignore it and worked hard on it and now are on the other side and they want to help others. It's a theme, and especially in the podcast world, or at least in my niche podcast world. And so I'm curious if you feel like it's a circular advice, yet the only advice that you just have to kind of like do the work. And then also I'm curious, because it came up so many times when I've interviewed people, it seems like 7 is this age where like almost everyone has their thing. Is that like a coincidence? Is there any research on that? Am I making that up?
Want more interesting conversations? Head over to mikeyop.com and sign up for a premium subscription. You'll get bonus podcasts, essays, and other goodies. Plus, it's the #1 way to support the show. Just go to mikeyop.com, mikeyop.com, and click subscribe, and we'll send you a link. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know it from a research perspective, but I've come across a lot of people who that was a pivotal time, and I've had psychologists tell me that that age you're making this shift, and I don't know enough about it to be able to explain to you why that, because as a coach I help people navigate sort of the present and into the future, and I don't dwell a lot. So as much as I've read a lot of psychology, I don't like to say I know what the theory is behind it, but anecdotally, definitely a lot of people around that age seem to seem to have this point where trauma from young age, or these kind of issues tend to surface right around that pivotal time.
Yeah, wow. And then I kind of asked it first, and then it was a weird order to ask. But what I'm saddened by is that the best advice you can give is the very advice you just gave, which is like, it takes work and you have to go and like, just change your beliefs and your mindsets. But it also just sounds pat, and it's like been overdone on Instagram by people who are way too young, in my opinion, to be offering life advice. And again, it's still the right advice. So I'm just kind of curious, like, when you get a new client, like, do you see them roll their eyes sometimes? Like, how do you deal with, it's just, I know it works. Your mindset is everything, but it's such a hard sell, especially to skeptical Americans who are like, no, I need to see results now. Like, if I don't see results within 3 days, you're selling me snake oil.
Yeah, well, there is a lack of patience in trying to make a lot of these changes. We live in a society where, you want the pill, you want the fast kind of hack to change your life. And there are things you can do that will show immediate results, but the lasting stuff is really, it's an evolution. It's not a revolution. And so, there are people who will go, oh man, I don't have the time and energy to put in. But there are the thing about change is it's a lot of small little steps. It's not like you have to overhaul your life all at once. So when people come to me, I usually, well, for the most part, I have like a quick 15-minute chat with them before we sort of get into before we even agree to work together, so that I know I'm the right person for them and they feel confident that that they want to work with me. So a lot of that stuff is usually resolved in the first kind of 10 minutes of talking. But there are different tools for different people. But you do need time, and you need some patience, and you need to have some compassion for yourself and the things that you've been through to get you where you are now. So I think that's really, really important. But to do the work, look, there's so many people that talk about it. Byron Katie is one. She talks about the work, and I don't think that there's any way around it. You can try and get quick fixes, and you can try to do things to be a high performer. But I find the people who are high performers and get a coach, or the people who get a high performance coach, often are already high performers, and what they actually need is someone to help bring some more balance into their life. So the people that come to me and feel stuck, I find more often than not I'll find the right words to resonate with them, and that so that they find that sort of inspiration to work through. So that's why I don't use a template or some one specific approach for everybody. I don't think everybody's different and unique, and I don't think it's useful to try and put everybody into one mold. So yeah, I hope that's a very roundabout way to answer your question, but
no, it's great. I actually loved your answer, and there's something I want to really pause on that you said that I think is really profound, which is, and it hasn't occurred to me until now, but maybe there's a point to all this. Like maybe it shouldn't be quick, and maybe the meaning of life, a lot of it has to do with this, because I read this after my event, and this is how I talk vaguely and specifically about this, but I had something really hard to deal with happen when I was about 36, and then I started reading that nearly everyone has a thing that happens to them in their life by the time they're 60. This was like a weird source, and I can't even quote it because it was just like in that phase of my life where I was reading anything that was offering me help with what I was going through. And it really stuck, and I started to notice that some people have it when they're real young, some people have it in their middle, like teen years, their 20s, their 30s, but the point is it tests you, and then the rest of your life is you not only working on that, but then helping others, or like however you can perceive like spreading the word. I believe so confidently in this that I don't even I almost take it for granted as a fact, but the way you described your process and the way you described everything really made me think that maybe there's like an even deeper purpose to all this. Like maybe the actual fun of a human life is being able to say, yeah, I had this awful feeling in my 30s and now I'm on the other side and I'm helping people. I'm just curious, is that any of that gel with you?
Absolutely. I would not be the person I am today without those challenges that I faced, and I'm really happy with who I am now. So I still have things that I'm working on. I don't think I'm perfect, but I've come so far from the way I used to be, and I find that everybody. I agree with you. Everybody either has some kind of a challenge that they've overcome that they can point to that's been a real shift or a pivot in their life. And I find that the people who've never really faced a major challenge, sometimes their challenges, they don't have this. They don't have the same drive, or they or focus, or sort of destination that they're trying to get to, and the people. I find part of the reason that people have that big challenge is there are those people who haven't had the big challenge because maybe they've been mentored really well, or they had just all these great influences that helped them get on track at a young age. And that's something I aspire to do as well. I try to work with the young people who are willing to work with me to mentor them. But if you don't, and you kind of ignore all those inner signals that are telling you something's wrong, like that's what I was doing. I was distracting myself and pushing those feelings down, and eventually it climaxed. And I find those major challenges we have, it's you'll either change your life or you'll have a crisis that forces you to change it. So whether it's an emotional one or it's a physical health one, or that's a relationship or a death in the family or something like that. I think either you recognize the changes that are needed and you undertake them, or you have a crisis that forces you to make that change. Either way, it's going to happen.
Yeah, and that's kind of exactly where I'm at in my life, which is where I'm starting to really wonder about the mystery behind all of this and what this is doing to all of us. But it also ties into what you said earlier, which is I just wrote about this last week. I'm a writer, and I'm just shocked by how sad I am about the pace of life now. I never saw it coming, but I don't like it. Like I can actually say out loud to people, like, I am putting up with this, but I don't like it. I don't like that. This is a small example, but like in America, there was an assassination attempt on a former president, and it was in the news for maybe 4 days. And I'm not even on a side of politics, and it doesn't even matter to me who the person was or anything. What matters to me is just this, like, oh my God, did you hear that this person had a miscarriage? Oh my God, let's send them flowers and like tell them that we're so sorry. And then like a week later, no one cares. And then that person feels even worse because they got like a flurry of attention and then there's no more attention. And I know I just brought up two completely opposite examples, but that's kind of my point is I feel like it's invaded all of space. Even like podcasts, like I'm pressured to keep to a time limit because audience retention goes down after a certain amount of time and all this kind of weird stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that? Because I have a feeling this is tied into like ennui and depression.
Well, the topic that I talk a lot about is happiness. And I think we undermine a lot of our own happiness in the way that we approach life, and it's the distractions that we have. I think, if I can talk for a second about happiness,
do.
one of the things I notice is that people will look for these peak moments, right? They'll look for the great vacation or the milestone they'll have achieved, or something that really, a moment that they have this big dopamine rush and they're feeling great. But everything else in between those peak moments, they look at as filler. And so I find that's such a lost opportunity for those little moments of joy and appreciation that you can have. And so to go back to the point you were making, we're so caught up in these, our attention is going here, there, and everywhere, and we really have a lack of presence. And because happiness is only in this moment, and so when we're not aware of, we're constantly distracted. Our attention is going to all these different places rather than into this present moment. We're just missing so many opportunities to really feel a lot of joy and happiness in the moment, and really connect with people in a more authentic way, rather than showing people who we are through what we have on Instagram, or the selfies we're taking, and that has become this replacement for these real authentic connections because we're more connected than ever before, and loneliness is an all-time high, and so is depression, and all of these sort of conditions of despair that we're living with are all to do with our sort of, well, it's the fast pace. In the work world, the fast pace it creates a lot of pressure and anxiety, but then within relationships, there's more and more people now that say, they have very little or no friends. Like the number of people who identify as having no friends is also at a peak level. So I see a lot of these. I'm a systemic coach, which means I work holistically. I look at a lot of different contributing factors to things, rather than looking at just cause and effect. And when we look at it, all of these things are contributing to the conditions that you've just pointed to, and it's the pace of life. It's where we let our attention go to. It's and how that then triggers all these different. We have these beliefs about life based on what we're perceiving. They create these strategies, and these strategies lead to behaviors, and it all kind of loops around and is not fulfilling us and is not making us happy. And I think that's such a I think to sort of get into the question you've asked and broaden it a bit, that's what I think is happening to a lot of people in this day and age.
That's so powerful what you said, and so truthful and so earnest. And where it confuses me and saddens me with your answer is I just can't tell if this was the kind of problem that you would still have in your little tribe, in your unnamed village, in your unnamed whatever, like 17,000 years ago. Like I keep wondering, at what point did human consciousness adopt enough reflection and awareness of other people's journeys that people started comparing and saying words like, I don't feel good. I don't, I just wonder so much about like this chicken egg question I have. But what's more relevant to you and what we're talking about is I also wonder if children today are going to see this and be so disturbed by it that they're going to like put it away and change culture, or if the opposite is that I'm just stuck in the middle and I'm not accepting change, and it's my job to actually see all the greatness in what you just described.
Well, I don't think it's a resistance to, change is inevitable. And I think, we are evolving towards something, but the question is, is it the right direction that we're heading into? Because going, when you talk about many generations ago or thousands of years ago, when people were in smaller tribes, I think there was a level of connection. They had other issues, certainly, and being really that close where everybody can observe everything you're doing has its drawbacks, certainly, but also, having this sense of community, and it's not just parents raising a child; it's the whole group. Those kind of things, that sense of being accepted and supported and so on, are things that we're lacking in today's society. Naturally, the danger was if you didn't fit into that close knit group that was kind of that community that you were part of, and you were shunned, then your chances of survival were diminished. So there are always trade-offs, but I think I don't think they had the same kind of challenges emotionally that we have today. And so it's funny. There are certain things that we can do. I had some friends visiting over the weekend with their kids, and we've got a 10-year-old girl in the house, and she doesn't use her phone much, and she doesn't watch a lot of TV. It's not like we forbid it, but she has much less access to those kind of digital forms of communication or entertainment and so on. And she after they left, she noticed, they came to visit us, but they were on their phone a lot. And so here you have this opportunity, people coming together to visit each other, and yet, and this is not negative about them. I think they're very much average in terms of, the way people are these days. But just having a child notice that contrast between the way our day to day is, and then these people come to visit us, and she's excited to interact with them, and then they're off on their phone, right? And so I think the technology that has helped us and has provided. Look at us talking. We're on other sides of the planet. There's some amazing things that technology has provided us, but I think the way we're applying it and using it is to our detriment at times. And I think that's something we need to become more aware of. And one of my coaching mottos is awareness allows change, because we internalize and we habituate so many behaviors that don't serve us. And I think that's what we need to start being more cognizant of.
Wow. I mean, that was just so powerful. I would love to just end the podcast on that note because it was so powerful, but I don't want to end it because I have more room to grow with you. It's time that we ask the only other planned question on the show, which is we ask every single guest, what do you think happens when you die?
I have an interesting perspective. Let me start by saying I think the thing that really took me from being very much an atheist and thinking you've got this life and that's all there is, to having a more spiritual perspective was reflecting on Einstein's idea that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form, and so we are essentially, at our base, we are energy. Whether you on a cellular level, but you can feel that in yourself. And so, and part of my therapy that I went to was actually regression therapy. And so I actually did some past life regression.
Wow.
For those who are open to that. So I don't think it's a topic that I can specifically answer for myself. Like I don't have this. I'm very open. I'm kind of agnostic as to what happens after. But I definitely think that this is one the one phase of our existence that we go through, and I think we have many opportunities to do so. So I kind of feel like I had a meditation teacher that really helped me a lot when I was still in Vancouver, and he gave me this really great metaphor. He said, imagine the universe is this ocean. It's an ocean of energy, and each of us are a drop in that ocean, and that the ocean is God. And, for me, everyone has a different kind of, God can be a very loaded word, but I'm just saying that kind of points towards, I like how Eckhart Tolle says, words can only point to the truth. And so I hope what I'm trying to do is point to my truth, which is, I feel like I'm energy that's part of a greater whole, and I have this focused experience here in this world, and then I kind of, when I'm done that, I kind of reassimilate into the whole, and then maybe come back and have that experience in a different way, and so that's sort of what I want to point towards in terms of what I believe in terms of what happens after we leave this life.
That's awesome. And a quick follow up. Did having those experiences in the regression specifically, and having acknowledged to yourself at least that you had past lives or other lives, as some people like to say, because time is perhaps not connected. Did that remove a fear of death? Did you have a fear of death before that? Did it shift your feelings towards death?
Well, funny enough, I because of my experience with depression, where I considered taking my own life, I didn't really have a fear of death. I think the idea of dying, like the pain or the, any kind of suffering associated with it, certainly, there's a certain level of fear of that. But a fear of no longer existing, or a fear of not being here in this body, that I haven't felt that since I was a kid. So no, I haven't had a fear of death in that respect.
That's awesome. And final question about that, just because it does come up enough on the show that I love to find out each person's way of dealing with it. I would say there's probably more skeptics than not when it comes to the subject of past and other lives in Western culture, of which Germany, Canada, and America, where I am, are certainly at the forefront.
Yep.
How often do you just like drop this to people, or are you pretty guarded with it because of the way people react?
I'm not guarded with it, but I don't. I look for the right I don't look for the opportunities, but when the right opportunities present themselves, I'm happy to share. Like I'm a fairly open person. I talk about my own mental health issues and everything. So if someone's open and willing to talk about it, I'm happy to share. But I need to sense that willingness there, and I don't just kind of share it with anybody. But this seemed like a good forum to talk about it, and so directly related to this idea of what happens when we die, and certainly it has shaped the way I live my life now, and my attitude towards life. And that's why I think it's such it's such an important topic, because that belief, whether you believe that it's the end and nothing else comes after that, or you think that you're going to go to heaven, the thing to ask yourself then is, okay, well, how does that influence the way I'm living my life now? If I believe that with a fair degree of certainty, or with a fair degree of conviction, then how is that impacting the way I'm living my life and what I believe about life?
Thank you. That was really deep. And I just want to compliment you again. Your conscientiousness is at such a high level, and it's really, I can feel it, and I think my audience can feel it. And that is related to my final question for you, which would be, if the average person listening to this is doing okay, and they would never say, I'm thrilled beyond belief and I'm always happy, but they also wouldn't say, I suffer from deep or problematic anxiety and depression and I need immediate help, what would you say is a first good step, besides asking you to help them, obviously, for a person like that, like a person who's just kind of doing okay, but they do have a feeling there's room for more awareness and more growth?
Well, the way I like to, if someone is looking, it depends on what they come to me for. Some people have a very clear goal that they need help achieving, and some people, and the rest usually come for some kind of a change. So sometimes the change that they're looking, so if you feel like, I'm not as happy as I could be because something needs to change, but I don't know what, right? So, so I think there's a lot of things you can do, but you need to look within. So, I use a tool called the Wheel of Life. It helps people make a measurement of where their life is right now, and you kind of measure. You put labels on different parts of your life, and then you kind of measure from 0 to 10 how good that feels, and that sometimes is a good starting point to go, what's the area of my life where I feel I really want to make a change, and then but don't stop there and look at, well, how does that part of my life affect all the rest? So that kind of work's difficult to do on your own. But that's something I encourage people to do. Become really aware of how the different parts of your life fit together, and if there's one part of your life that's kind of feels like it's weighing everything else down. So that would be one piece, and then the other part is just to reflect on, do I recognize any beliefs that are standing in my way, right? Mm-hmm. And does that lead to certain ways of thinking that inhibit me, and so on? So a great way to do that is just to do some journaling, getting your words on the page and then reading them back to yourself is such a great way to look at the language that's kind of percolating in your mind. Like you as a writer, that what a great outlet, because I write a lot too, and I find what a liberating and very cathartic opportunity we have to work through things. But for people who don't feel writing's the right thing, I still think journaling's great. And sometimes having this conversation with someone that you trust is a great way to get those words out and then have them reflect that back to you. So for me, a lot of it comes back to what are the words I'm using? What beliefs do they point to? And that will usually identify anything where people are having a challenge in their life. I guarantee we can find a belief that's behind that, that's anchoring that. And so that's, I know I've thrown a whole bunch of things out there, but I find beliefs and our chronic way of thinking or habitual way of thinking is usually at the bottom of it. So if you have some area in your life where you go, look, I'm not as happy as I could be. So we talked about happiness, and I look at happiness as this feedback, right? It's a feedback loop. So in other words, if I'm feeling happy, that's kind of life giving me that feedback. It's my inner guidance system telling me that the way I'm living, or like the choices I'm making, the actions I'm taking are in line with my values and my needs and that sort of thing. Or that feedback is telling me the way I'm looking at life, at the world, is in alignment with I'm seeing the world in a way that is positive, that helps me, right? So those two combinations, I think, and then when we're feeling happy or if we're feeling unhappy, it's usually a sign that something about the way we're perceiving the world or the way we're interacting with the world is off kilter, and usually what gets us there is our beliefs and our chronic way of thinking. So.
Wow, thank you so much, Peter. This has been an incredible experience talking to you. You're gifted and you're kind and you're helpful and you want to help people, and I hear it in your voice and I feel it in our conversation. And so please, everyone who's listening at home, take a moment to check out Peter and his work, and if you think he could help you, which I'm sure he could, please consider contacting him. Once again, you have been listening to Coffin Talk. My name is Mike Oppenheim. This is our last audio-only show. So if you are excited for video, get on that, and there will be instructions for how to find that. But if you're a normal listener, you don't have to do anything differently. You'll still get the podcast in whatever app you currently are subscribed in. And again, Peter Teuscher from Germany, thank you so much for coming on our show. My name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.